Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to have you for the first webinar of the series of webinar on inculcating entrepreneurship in higher education institutes of India. India faces a number of challenges on its way to a $5 trillion economy goal set by Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. And it can only be met if it has innovative, well-educated, and entrepreneurial citizens who have the spirit and the inquisitiveness to think in ways and the courage to meet and adapt to the challenges facing them. Moreover, a dynamic economy which is innovative and able to create 10 million jobs a year will require greater number of young people who are willing and able to become entrepreneurs. Young people who will launch and successfully develop their own commercial or social ventures, or who will become innovators in the wider organizations in which they work. Entrepreneurship in India has significantly grown, making it the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. And startups are beginning to dramatically impact the Indian economy. Enabled by strong demographics and an open commercial culture, new company registration has grown from 15,000 in 1980s to 18 lakh in registered companies by 2019. With average age of about 28 years, India's entrepreneurs rank amongst the youngest in the world. Indian economy has benefited from country's accelerating startup activity. The 30,000 plus DPIIT recognized startups have created over 386,000 jobs as of June 2020. Many of these startups are beginning to spread the benefits beyond their traditional locations and into the regional economies. Despite India's entrepreneurial strength, as many as 3/4 of Indian startups are unable to continue beyond the first 5 years. A recent survey revealed lack of pioneering innovation, lack of sufficient skills, inadequate mentoring, and inexperienced leadership as some of the leading reasons. Therefore, education seems to be the key to shape young minds, attitudes, skills, and culture. Entrepreneurial education is essential not only to shape the mindsets of young people, but also to provide the skills and knowledge that are central to developing an entrepreneurial culture. Startup India is pleased to announce a series of webinars on inculcating entrepreneurship in higher education institutions, aimed at presenting current status, best practices, and successful examples from leading global academic institutions. The complexity of our world is adding new challenges. While not all challenges require direct responses or can be solved by higher education institutions, yet in totality, these challenges have raised questions about the relevance of the traditional models on which these institutions operate. So therefore, with the aim to illustrate the variety of ways in which higher education institutions across the world can act entrepreneurially and innovatively in their strategies and practices, Startup India is delighted to welcome Professor Rhonda Schrader, Dr. Paris Deltras, and Professor Rakesh Basant to drive the conversation and present their views on how to train the future generations of entrepreneurs and innovators in skills required to start their own businesses. Today, the first speaker that we have is Professor Schrader. She is the Executive Director of University of California's Entrepreneurship Program at Berkeley Haas, as well as the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corporation program by the United States government for the Bay Area. She has served as a longtime mentor for University of California's Idea to IPO course, is an active advisor for NASA's spin-off BrainAid, and has mentored several startups over the years. Under her vision and guidance, entrepreneurship at Berkeley has grown into one of the most prestigious and successful innovation hubs in the world. Good evening, Professor Schrader.
Hello.
Professor Schrader will be talking to us today about combating the European paradox or the innovation paradox. Several Indian researchers face this problem, which is essentially to translate scientific advances into marketable innovations. Professor, I would request you to kindly give us an introduction to NSF's I-Corps and entrepreneurship at Berkeley Haas.
Right. So the paradox is real, and it still exists, and we try to combat it with training to get our students and our researchers focused on their customers and not the technology. Essentially lean startup that we apply through I-Core, that we apply throughout the ecosystem at Berkeley, from 1-week courses to full semester courses. It teaches the application of the scientific method to business. So, for example, how do you craft a hypothesis about what your customers care about? How do you test that hypothesis, validate it, invalidate it, repivot and retest if necessary, in order to find out essentially who cares, why do they care, how much do they care? So that's essentially lean startup in a nutshell. It's very easy to understand. It's much more difficult to apply. You're muted, Kavya. Sorry.
Unmute yourself.
Oh.
Sorry. We had another question for you, which was, what are the skills essential to converting a scientific innovation into a marketable product? And what are the skills that entrepreneurs and especially universities should be focusing on inculcating through their curriculum?
Right. Well, it goes back to something you said in the introduction about having inquisitiveness. So you need that obsessive inquisitiveness about your customers and what their potential needs are. It's not just about how great your technology is. Most businesses do not fail all around the world. They don't fail because of lack of technology. They fail because of a lack of customers. So by applying the scientific method over and over to understand your customers, who cares, why do they care, how much do they care, you will have a better odds of translating your research into marketable products or not.
Thank you for your insightful answer. Going further, just wanted to understand from you, where do you think that most institutions fail at promoting these researchers into becoming marketable products?
I have a great example of that. At Berkeley, we have a fundamental innovation known as CRISPR, gene editing. One of our PhD students was writing her PhD using CRISPR to make a high quality oil. Spent 6 years doing the research, always assumed that it would be for cosmetics, that cosmetic companies would want this. In 1 week, when she finally got out of the building and started talking to customers, she quickly discovered none of the potential customers cared. They were happy with their solutions. They did not want more technology. But because she used the skill of inquisitiveness and listening without bias, one of her customers identified a problem for someone he knew, a fish farmer. So a fish farmer desperately needed high quality oils to feed his fish. And then suddenly this PhD student has a business, not the business she thought, but we like to say she pivoted from cosmetics to fish food in about 10 customer discovery interviews. So I think it's more important for researchers to get out of the building early to understand and inform the potential commercial applications for their research.
Understood. Thank you so much for the answer. Another question that a professor posed in front of us that we would like to direct towards you would be, what are some of the best practices that from your experience at National Science Foundation's Innovation Corporation and from your experience at Entrepreneurship at Berkeley has, that you think can be implemented in Indian universities and in Indian incubators and accelerators?
I think the lean startup methodology, I think, is the single best practice because it gets everyone out of the building. We like to say there are no facts inside the building. It's only about what your customers care about. So the fundamental teaching and application of that framework through all stages of the business, from ideation through prototyping, through scaling of the businesses, the fundamental skills apply. So the better of a practitioner you can become, the more successful your business will be.
Understood. So is it is in your opinion the lean startup pedagogy rather is the way to foolproof a startup idea, or is it is it a method to combat failure?
Well, failure is celebrated in Lean Startup. We have, at the end of our national program, 100 customer discovery interviews. Teams then make a decision: are they a go, are they a no-go, or do they need to go back and do more research? No-goes are celebrated equally. That's an equally valid result.
Thank you so much, Professor Schrader, for your insightful answers.
Thanks.
Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Schrader, for your insightful answers. We'll now be moving forward and asking questions to Professor Paris. He's the managing director of IE Venture Lab, and he's the managing director of IE Venture Lab and the professor of entrepreneurship at IE Business School, Spain. Dr. Paris is an entrepreneur and an angel investor himself and has developed and registered over 2 patents and has over 20 years of experience in banking, in investment banking and venture capital with leading organizations including UBS Bank and ANS AMRO. Under Professor Paris's guidance and leadership, IE Business School has been ranked amongst the most innovative and entrepreneurial institutions in the world. We welcome you, Professor Paris, to this webinar, and we'd like to start off by giving an introduction to the topic that you would be speaking about, which is very dear and near to all university incubators in India, especially today, which is whether to resist and defend or embrace and prospect the opportunity or the challenges that have been posed by COVID-19. Professor, we would like you to first give an introduction to IE Venture Lab and entrepreneurship at IE.
Okay, thank you, Kavya. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and also to be amongst this esteemed crowd of experts from around the world. As you said, I run the Venture Lab. I've been running it for the last 10 years. My career, I'm not a typical academic, as I think, Rhonda, you're not a typical academic either. I spent my first 21 years in investment banking. I then became an entrepreneur for 8 years with 5 startups. 2 of them failed miserably. And then I got my PhD and I've been running the Venture Lab for the last 10 years at the school and also as a professor. So as you can see, every time I change careers, I make less money. But I really enjoy what I'm doing. And this is a great time to be teaching, working in entrepreneurship, because it's not the flavor of the month. It's actually the flavor of the decade and maybe even longer. Now, you mentioned COVID-19, but before I get into that, let me introduce our lab. When I took over the lab, IE Business School 10 years ago was not a technology university. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've gotten into technology. We have one of the biggest masters in big data in the world. But traditionally, when I took over, we were not a technology school. And that for me was important because when everybody thinks about entrepreneurship, they think high-tech startup. That is a minority of the entrepreneurship going on in the world today. Most entrepreneurs are not these guys, dropping out of undergraduate school and starting a technology startup. Most entrepreneurs are in their 30s or 40s and they're opening restaurants. They are the backbone of industry. In the United States right now, I think 80% of the GDP is, companies of less than 50 employees. We're talking the backbone of American industry is small, SMEs, mom and pop operations, the ones, unfortunately, that are suffering today in COVID-19. And especially in states like California, where, you essentially almost have a shutdown because of the situation with COVID. So, I think one of the things India needs to take away from this, but I think, you're probably already seeing that, is if you want to grow your economies, you need to support small startups, small and medium-sized companies, enterprises. You need to promote that. You need to have laws that encourage angel investing. You need to have laws that encourage, for tax purposes, also just people taking risk in small companies. Because at the end of the day, it's these risk takers that are the ones that, are the backbone of the growth of most economies. And if you look, I'm in Europe right now, and I've been here for the last 20 years. And essentially what you see in Europe is that, in most countries, the governments actually make it harder for small companies to get started, to get going. And that's a problem. And that's something that we're seeing starting to change, because they're also realizing that they need to promote these things. So, what I'm getting at is when we started the Venture Lab, when I took over the Venture Lab, it had been going for many years before that at the school, but I took a completely different approach. I said, entrepreneurship is not just about technology. But we need to embrace all kinds of entrepreneurship. And in particular, in our school, what's amazing is the diversity. 95% of our students are not Spanish. Everything is in English. But when you have that level of diversity, and you've been there, Kavya, you've seen it face to face. Actually, our number one, national group is Americans, about 20% of the school, and India is number two with about 11% of the school. And then we have Mexico, Chinese, whatever, from all over the world. But that diversity creates a richness for entrepreneurship also that's unique. And so as a school, and I don't know, I'd love to hear some of the other views on this. I don't think you can teach someone to become an entrepreneur, because the reality is that the risk taking associated with becoming an entrepreneur is something very personal. It's not something you learn in school. We can teach you how to think like an entrepreneur. We can give you the tools, like you were saying, Rhonda, lean startup and the like. We can give you the toolkit, but we can't essentially, push you off the ledge. That takes a special person. And in some countries like the US, we actually, we'll mortgage our house for entrepreneurship. People could do crazy things in the US, and increasingly in lots of other markets. But so our methodology at the school is, we teach you a mindset. And if you think about it, I'll ask you, what does an entrepreneur see in uncertainty? Rhonda, what do you think?
She said opportunity, which is right, I suppose.
Right.
So,
yes, I think they see an opportunity and possibility. It's how can I, what's my angle?
Yeah. Exactly. And so, but what do most people see? They see fear. So I like to say this to my students as soon as they come into the school. I say to them, if you can learn one thing from being here, that should be it. If you can leave this school always seeing opportunity from uncertainty, you will be way above the rest. And those are the types of people that leading edge companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, the really the disruptive companies of today, those are the people that they want. People that, it's lead, follow, or get out of the way. But these people are the ones that during times of uncertainty, they excel. And that's what we try to teach our students. We try to, give them a toolkit where that essentially it changes their mindset. And so for us, diversity is not so much a social value, but it's an economic value. Because you can see through diversity that you become more adept to, global situations, to thinking differently, to working with other people. Now, a lot of people ask me, so what happened during COVID-19? Usually I have about 56 teams that every 6 months go through the Venture Lab. During COVID-19, we had 104. It was amazing. Everybody wanted to do entrepreneurship. All of a sudden, uncertainty was the flavor of the month. And believe me, this situation is really bad. We are going to lose in the West 25% of white collar jobs by the time this is over, especially in Europe. So, the battle for talent will be enormous. So what is going to differentiate you as a person? It's going to be your mindset. And in the words of Professor Dweck out of Stanford, that growth mindset. And this is essentially what we're talking about here. When, if you see opportunity and uncertainty, it's that growth mindset. And Kavya, you and I were talking the other day, my PhD was on the relationship of individuals to uncertainty. This is in 2011, a long time before COVID. So the work I've been doing is essentially how do you get people to be more comfortable with uncertainty? And happy to talk about it next some other time. But essentially, the way that my work and my theory that I've been working on, also with a couple of professors from Stanford, also from Berkeley, has been, why do people struggle so much with the phrase "get out of your comfort zone"? Think about it. Everybody says that to you all the time, right? But it's like, deer under headlights. Get out of your comfort zone. The reason why people struggle is because they don't separate the personal from the professional. If I said to you, get out of your professional comfort zone, no problem. The same thing happens with uncertainty. Your relationship with uncertainty is very different in your professional life than it is in your personal life. Actually, what our research has shown over the last 6 years is that those people like Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, those people that are truly innovative, disruptive in their professional lives, entrepreneurial minded, guess what they're like in their personal lives? Nerds. And that makes sense. I'm an extrovert professionally, but I'm nerdy in my personal life, because what do we look for in our lives? We look for a balance, right? So, and we can talk more about that sometime, but essentially, the Venture Lab essentially teaches people to think like entrepreneurs. It puts them through an acceleration process that hopefully makes their startups investor ready. We have never seen so much interest in entrepreneurship as we do now. And I think this is going to grow. And alluding to what Rhonda said, because the problem in most countries outside of the United States is that failure is taken personally. And that's a problem. We need to celebrate failure, just like you guys do with your lean startup thing, where, as many times as you fail, you celebrate that. We need to change people's mindset. We are being trained in our high schools, in our universities, especially in India, for a predictable world. You're being trained for a world where, the smarter you are, the higher your IQ, the more successful you're going to be. And that's not the real world. The real world is not a chess game. It's more like a poker game. And nowadays you need to learn about things like emotional intelligence, dealing with uncertainty, all these things. And those are the things that you learn when you're in environments of high diversity, because you're forced out of your comfort zone all the time. If you're in an environment with no diversity, you're in your comfort zone all the time. So COVID-19 was amazing. Going back to the question you wanted me to approach, what we saw during COVID-19 from our students is essentially that professionally we were forced to deal with more uncertainty than ever before because of COVID-19. It was like a truck. I mean, it was like, one of the things that is a buzzword for the last 10 years is digital transformation. What does that mean? It means different things to different people. But the biggest driver of digital transformation today is COVID-19, right? COVID-19 has forced us to deal with uncertainty. But what's interesting, back to my work, my theory work, or my methodology, is that COVID-19 also made us want less uncertainty in our personal lives, which is also very interesting, because the world's a mess right now. We don't know where we're going. I was lucky. I just got, as you said, I'm in Portugal right now. I was lucky because this is the first time I'm able to leave the country since March. And I know I got friends of mine at Berkeley that haven't left their homes since March. I know a few people like that. So I know that in some places, but see, all this is creating a situation that professionally, is forcing us to deal with uncertainty much more. And that's why I think that entrepreneurship is not something that should be treated like a different discipline. It should go horizontally across all disciplines. Entrepreneurship is a way of looking at the world, whether you're in marketing, in the law school, or in biotechnology, or whatever. We cannot afford to have people trained to be in boxes anymore, because those jobs don't exist anymore. You could get fired at 55, and if all you know is what's in your box, you're going to have a problem. You won't be able to reinvent yourself. So, I think Indian universities need to embrace entrepreneurship. I know that, and Rhonda, you're probably aware, I think about, I don't know, 5 years ago, Tom Byers was leading a program at the NSF at Stanford regarding taking entrepreneurship curriculum into engineering schools in the US. And because the engineering schools in the US, needed to get the engineers to think differently. And India is a perfect example of that. India is a country of nerds professionally. You need to get these people to, think more business wise, think more with emotional intelligence, think more, dealing with uncertainty, because then that's a very powerful combination. And you guys, produce some of the smartest people in the world in your universities. But smart's not going to be good enough anymore. We're going to have to be street smart or whatever, but we're going to have to really embrace conditions of uncertainty like never before.
Thank you, Professor Paris. Building on to your last few comments, we had a question which was essentially, how exactly has IE University and IE Venture Lab taken this entrepreneurship as a horizontal, how has IE University plugged it in to different curriculums, to different, to different disciplines, instead of having it as a separate discipline? And what essentially are some of the best practices, especially now that, we have seen in the current environment how people are not as risk-taking anymore, to perhaps how has our university re-inculcated risk-taking mindset into student entrepreneurs? I know you said that, that is not a mindset that you can inculcate in someone. However, you can always repolish it. So just wanted to understand more about that.
Okay. Yeah. So in our business school, we force students to take entrepreneurship in their core. So that's pretty unique about our school. But across the entire university, undergraduate, law school, school of design, everywhere, we have entrepreneurship electives. And then we encourage, and when I was saying earlier that we had 102 teams in entrepreneurship this year in the Venture Lab, it's from across the entire school. So we actively promote people working on startup projects across the school. And one of the reasons why we do that, because if you sit with recruiters today of companies even like Amazon, they will tell you that when they're looking at people's CVs, they're looking for entrepreneurship experience. Because what does that tell you? It means that people have learned, making mistakes, they've learned from them, they think out of the box, they're adaptable. So more than ever before, having entrepreneur experience in your curriculum is critical. In terms of the second part of your question, that had to do with, remind me what it was, it was
re-inculcating. How do you re-inculcate risk-taking mindset?
What was the second part of your question?
So it was, how do you re-inculcate a risk-taking behavior, yes, or risk-taking mindset into students, especially in the current environment?
Okay. Like I said earlier, I don't think we can teach people to become risk takers. But what we can do, if you look at 10 years ago, entrepreneurship, if you told your parents, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, in many societies, they would have said, can't you get a real job? I think millennials more than ever, see, my generation, and I don't know if I'm in the same generation as Rakesh and Rhonda here, but I'm a baby boomer. In my generation, I was taught in the States, you have a good job, and a good job is where you make a lot of money, and the more money, the better. And then you figure out how you want to live your life with the money that you make. Millennials, they don't want a good job. They want a great job, because for them, their job is part of their life. Okay, so we need to teach our students, our young people. And I think this is why, as I said at the beginning, entrepreneurship is not a fad. It's not the flavor of the month anymore. Everybody's thinking about this, because millennials today, they want jobs that challenge them. And the typical 9-to-5 job doesn't challenge people anymore. Even in the US, they say that by 2030, half the population are going to be freelancers. Why do people want to become freelancers? Because they're also looking to have more diversity in their life, more flexibility in their life, more challenging things, not this typical 9-to-5. So I think, yes, we can teach people, not essentially, I wouldn't put it in the way of being more risk takers, but to look at different options to their career paths, and options that sure might seem a little more risky, but you know what? At the end of the day, if you really believe and you're passionate about what you're doing, you're not going to have a problem getting a job. You're not going to have a problem somebody hiring you. So I don't see it that much as teaching people to take risk. I see it as teaching people that there are many more options out there for career choices in the world today, and they don't have to be the traditional ones.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Paris. And the last question that we had for you was essentially about, could you, like in your experience, what are some of the engagement policies? It could be related to, access to IP or industry academia collaborations that work the best to help students, especially aspiring student entrepreneurs, in accelerators and incubators, especially university accelerators and incubators. In your experience at IE University, what has been the game-changing factor?
The game-changing factor, we at IE do not invest in the projects of our students, and that is a policy that we've had for a long time. But we have an ecosystem of angel investors, which we feel is second to none. I mean, so I think the real game changer for students is, if you think about it, and this is something everybody hears all the time. What does an investor invest in? They invest in teams. So we feel that the best way to help people become entrepreneurs is to help them find the right team. Ideas are cheap. And even, there's a statistic which I think a lot of students hate when I tell them this, but a lot of people have studied this. And the last statistic I saw was that 90% of innovation today is a copy or an improvement of something that already exists. You think investors want to hear something like, I'm doing something that's never been done before? No, an investor doesn't want to hear that. An investor wants to hear that I have an idea that already exists in Brazil, and we're going to bring it to LA or to Madrid, and we're going to, localize it. And, people have invested $10 million already in this in Brazil. That's exactly what an investor wants to hear. That's already been proven. So if you can, the game-changing part of the accelerator has got to be how you match people around teams and how you cultivate those teams to get people to work together in these teams in a seamless way around ideas. And I think, as Rhonda said earlier, you got to get out of the building. It's about lean startup. It's about experimenting. It's when I joined the school 10 years ago, people were doing 40-page business plans. That's all gone. This is about going out there and experimenting right away. And that's why, as I was saying to you earlier, Calvi, one of the things we're doing now is, for the very first time, we're going to take our venture lab to the public. So, and COVID caused this. For 2 years, I've been telling my school, let's do an online version of this accelerator. And they were like, no, who's going to want to take it online? Now, during COVID-19, the whole program was online. We have never received the feedback from students that we've received during this COVID time. They just loved it because we were able, for the first time, to bring mentors from all over the world, even from places like Silicon Valley. We had the online environment created an ability to bring together not only teams with people all over the world, but mentors and experts from all over the world around a seamless methodology that was, with great technology, that created an amazing product at the end of the day. And then, so what we're going to be doing, because as you said earlier, we're very, lucky to have been ranked number 2 in the world by Bloomberg this year in entrepreneurship. We're going to take this program to the public. And we're going to hopefully harness mentors from all over the world and professors from all over the world to teach in these sessions. And I think this is going to be the real game changer in acceleration in the future, to get away from this very local acceleration program. We need to think global, and we need to think diverse, and we need to think team. And the richness of the diversity is what makes teams great.
Thank you so much, Professor Paris. Now, moving on to our third speaker for the day, which is Professor Rakesh Basant. He's an Indian economist and a professor at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He is the JSW Chair Professor of Innovation and Public Policy since October 2016. He has co-authored over 6 books, delivered lectures in various leading universities from around the globe, including University of California, Berkeley, Stanford University, and Yale University. Professor Rakesh Basant is also has been a former consultant with World Bank and is a founding member of CIIE, which is Center for Innovation, Incubation and Entrepreneurship at IIM Ahmedabad. IIM Ahmedabad is one of the leading premier institutes of India, and we would love to hear Professor Rakesh Basant give an Indian context to this entire conversation. Entrepreneurship in India, as I mentioned earlier, has grown by double digits over the years, and we are grateful to academia. However, there are certain challenges that academia faces that IIM Ahmedabad has been able to combat with its solutions, and we would love to hear more about that from Professor Basant. We would request him to kindly give an introduction to CIIE and entrepreneurship education at IIM Ahmedabad.
Thank you, Kavya. It's a pleasure to be here, and we've heard two very good people, and I enjoyed hearing them. Our center is about 20 years old. We started on a very small scale in 2000. The key part of our journey has been that we have been experimenting right through. And we have moved from one experiment to the other. Some things worked, some things did not work. And so there are 4 or 5 things which I would like to highlight about our centers compared to other centers in India and even centers abroad. One is that we have evolved as an organization continuously. We started in a small way in Ahmedabad, but we soon realized that we need to have scale. And so now we are national in our footprint. We have people in different parts of the country, and anybody from anywhere in India can come and apply to us. It's not restricted to our own students. So we are an open incubator and located in multiple locations. That's one key difference. The other difference is that we are very autonomous in our functioning. Although we are part of the Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad, our parent institution, but we function just like in an independent autonomous entity, although we are very organically linked to the institute, which I'll talk about in a bit. The other interesting part is that although we are a management school, we have decided to focus on supporting, incubating and accelerating startups who are technology enabled. We are not talking about technology only startups, but they should have a key ingredient which is part of technology. So although being in a management school, we focus on technology-driven startups, and we are quite diversified. We are not focused on a particular sector, from clean energy to agri-tech to civic tech to fintech. We have a very diverse kind of portfolio. When we started, one of the key things which we had to do as one of the first incubators and accelerators in the country to help create the ecosystem in places like where Rwanda is, the ecosystem already exists, and the universities are located in places which have all the ingredients of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. This was not the case for us, and we very soon realized that we have to contribute to this ecosystem building, which we did fairly actively, and I'm quite happy that we did. I think we did a very good job of that. There are 2 other things which I would like to mention. One is that we are probably the only incubator which has a VC-like fund. Recently, MIT Engine has come up, but we have experimented with a VC fund since 2013, which was focused on clean energy. But now we have a larger VC fund. Just like Paris said, we don't invest alone. I mean, we try and syndicate, we co-invest with others. But ours is the only incubator where a VC fund is attached, which we manage and run. And finally, the key difference in our incubator as compared to other higher education institutions in India is that the teaching and research at IMA through courses, student projects, research projects, it's very intricately linked with the incubation and acceleration activities of the center. So the data we generate feeds into teaching. We have interesting startups, both failures and successes, feed into case writing. So there's this, the three-legged stool, which I call it, the incubation acceleration part of it, teaching and research. They're all intertwined, and it has taken us a lot of time to get this right, because oftentimes one of the legs is taller than the other, and we have a wobbly stool. But I think we have now achieved a kind of balance which will keep us sustainable for a long time.
Thank you, Professor Basant, for that insightful answer. We had a question for you, which is essentially something that I had touched upon at the beginning of this webinar, which was, despite India's entrepreneurial strength, quite a few startups, which is almost as big, the numbers as big as 3/4 of the number of startups, are not able to take their operations for more than 5 years. And an Oxford University research paper recently showed that lack of pioneering innovation and lack of sufficient skills are the core of that problem. We wanted to understand from you that what role can Indian academia play in this? And beyond that, what are the best practices that are employed by CIIE that can combat these particular challenges as far as pioneering innovation and lack of sufficient skills are concerned?
I think that's a very critical question for us to understand and find answers to. So let me make some general points first, and then I'll come to what CII is trying to do to take care of those issues. Unlike Europe, Western Europe, and the US, most of our higher education institutions are not really research intensive. So therefore, we have very limited research output, and a much smaller part of that output is such which can be taken to the market. So the research that can be either licensed or taken to the market through entrepreneurial means is very limited, unlike in the West, right? So the first thing that one needs to put our act together is to have more research intensive institutions. We are moving in that direction, but we still have a long way to go. So to my mind, that is one of the critical things which the Oxford study has also kind of pointed out. The other issue which Paris mentioned in some sense is that the recognition of doing something entrepreneurial, whether you are licensing your technology or becoming an entrepreneur yourself, is not something which is recognized either by the university or by society. So as a result, if I'm a student, I want to become an entrepreneur, people don't look at me positively. Once again, that is changing. If I'm a teacher and my performance is to be measured, they'll look at what I have published and what is my teaching feedback. I mean, nobody would really bother about the fact that I sort of commercialized the technology that I had developed or took somebody else's technology and created an enterprise and so on. So that's not part of the matrix for measuring my performance as a teacher. Now, to me, the biggest challenge that higher education institutions in India face to inculcate or create entrepreneurial mindset as well as new entrepreneurs is that, once again, unlike Western Europe, Paris talked about IE, we all know about Berkeley, Stanford, Harvard's, Yale's of the world. We do not have, and people may not like me saying this, we do not have a single large multidisciplinary university which encompasses all kinds of disciplines: science, engineering, design, management, liberal arts, social science, and so on. Paris talked about diversity, and diversity comes from the background of individuals, but it also comes from the multiplicity of disciplines in a location. So if I go and teach in a US university, the students who take my courses come from manufacturing, gymnastics, music, and so on. I mean, the diversity is so huge, and both innovation and entrepreneurship essentially are multidisciplinary subjects. And as Paris said, you can't really teach these things, that all these things have to come together. Your mind opens up simply by getting exposed to all these kinds of disciplines. And so as a result, if I have an idea, the kind of multidisciplinary inputs that can come in through simply bumping into people in a coffee shop or elsewhere, or in a classroom where somebody else is taking a similar course, is completely missing, and we lose out on soft skills. And we are understanding of the way the other things, how a design person will look at my idea, how a person who's in psychology would look at my idea. We simply do not have the kind of exposure of that kind. The other disconnect that we have is that our linkages with industry are really poor, and which means that we don't get live projects, most of our institutions, and we don't get the kind of mentoring that might be required for the entrepreneurial kind of activity. Now, we recognize all these lacuna that we have, and as a result, we proactively have made efforts to create a network of, we are a business school or management school, so we have built network with people who know technology. We have built networks with design people. We have built networks with people who understand rural markets and so on. So we have consciously created networks which will help us bridge these gaps. And our alumni network is extremely vibrant and strong. So that has been really, really helpful. The other thing that we realized fairly early in the game, that incubation is a scale game. You can't really create a sustainable incubator or an accelerator at a very, very small scale. So that led us to go countrywide and get into larger number of startups to support, and reach out to different city clusters to get multiple disciplinary kind of inputs. And we also pushed for more autonomy in running the incubation center. So often when you are part of the higher education institution, the bureaucracy of the institution, which is quite old, sort of pulls you down in some sense. And fortunately for us, we were able to get that autonomy, both operational and financial, which helped us get good people and retain them. And as a result, we have fairly large, we have some 85 people across the country with multiple kinds of backgrounds who are working with us right now. And as a result, we are financially sustainable, we are operationally sustainable. And since we have been able to build bridges with the academic part of IMA through research and teaching, we are also organizationally sustainable, because IMA sees in this entity as an opportunity to learn. And as a result, both teaching and research opportunities open up, and IMA faculty and students feel that here is an entity located on our campus which can create significant learning opportunities for us, which means that we are looked at positively and not an entity which creates entrepreneurs which people don't value very much.
Thank you, Professor Basant, for that insightful answer. We really appreciate it. I'd now be directing questions that were asked by the audience to the panel speakers. The first question was for Professor Rhonda, which was essentially by a professor, and his question reads, in the battle between traditional teaching methods and entrepreneurial way of teaching, often traditional education remains the predominant approach in practice, and it has been so since a century. This is often attributed to end utility and the quantifiable test results. Could you suggest some ways in which that one, or some best practices that one should keep in mind while trying to change that century-old mindset?
That's a great question. And that's one of the first things that I address in any of my classes, whether it's a 1 week class or a full semester. I have this great tip that says it's okay to be wrong. We were taught from day one that we're supposed to find the right answer. We go all the way through school. That's how we're rewarded, by getting the right answer. In entrepreneurship, it's okay to be wrong. And that is, I think, the biggest mindset shift to help people get over that thinking.
Thank you, Professor. I would direct the question now to Professor Paris and Professor Basant. Do you have any inputs on the same question? Especially Professor Basant, you've seen the Indian university environment and the ecosystem. Any inputs from your end?
As I said, and I completely agree with Paris, that you should not have entrepreneurship courses. And these courses should cut across all the disciplines that are taught in your university. So while we have entrepreneurship specific courses, there are parts of entrepreneurship which feed into virtually all courses, and we people take from marketing and of course some management schools. So we don't have other disciplines, but what we have tried to do, and it has worked well for us, is to do entrepreneurship related courses around projects, and which forces people, as Rhonda said, to go out and check what is happening. So, for example, I'm currently teaching a course which is called New Technology Application Design and Business Models. And so we partner with designers and people who are working in a technology domain, form student teams, and we choose a technology domain. They come up with applications, choose one which they find exciting, and then start thinking about how the interface would look like, the design part of it, and then start talking to customers and figure out what the business model will look like. So it's all a hands-on stuff. I mean, and they get excited because it's a live project for them, and they are trying to develop it on their own. And as a teacher, I'm not particularly worried about whether they will come up with an idea which will sell in the market. I'm not worried about that at all. What I'm interested in is to get them exposure to this multidisciplinarity which is involved in this whole process of figuring out what kind of application would run and what will be the nature of the application in terms of design and business model and so on. So the process of interacting with people with multiple backgrounds and process of thinking through the entire application is something which, to my mind, makes for the entrepreneurial mindset, as Paris said, rather than trying to make them an entrepreneur. Right. So that's the.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Paris, any inputs on the question? Sir, you're on mute.
I think between Rhonda and Professor Rakesh, I think they covered everything.
Thank you. The next question is in fact for Professor Paris. This is again a question from a professor, and he asks that a lot of past research has suggested that nearby peers are more likely to influence performance than those far away, which explains why a lot of Indian university incubators and a lot of Indian universities focus on side-by-side scientist form of learning rather than networking. But can entrepreneurs, and especially student entrepreneurs, expect the same benefit that scientists get from peer learning, or should they focus on networking? And could you please elaborate on the networking bit of the program that has been implemented at our university?
Okay, the first thing I would do is I would argue with that statement that the scientific community gains from side-by-side collaboration. Research and development is probably the biggest wasteful activity in the world today, if you think about it. So I would definitely argue with that. I don't think peer side-by-side peer research has been a success. I'm not sure that's the problem of R&D, but R&D is terribly inefficient, and for the amount of money that's put into it, we get very little back from it in many instances. I think when you look at creating diversity around research, you get a lot more back from that. And I think a lot of you see it in a lot of the American schools, and probably at Berkeley, Rhonda, you see it as well. That the diversity at places like Berkeley in the engineering school. Berkeley is the #3 engineering school in the world, and the diversity that you see when you walk inside the engineering school is just amazing. So I think diversity as well as peer-to-peer can help, but the remote is also very useful. So how do you encourage that? Well, as I said earlier, we encourage our teams to use mentors from all over the world, and not just mentors that are like that you can have a coffee with. And sure enough, as a result of COVID-19, students for the first time were able to see the value in online mentorship from mentors all over the world. And I recently did an exercise where we actually created teams with students, and we actually chose the teams with people all over the world. And it was an incredibly rich exercise that the students gained a lot from, when all of a sudden they were dealing with people they didn't even know. And now they were, working in a team with those people, because we had seen that they had certain things that we thought might be a fit between them. And sure enough, it was a great exercise. So I think there are lots of things we can do to create more diversity and more networking in entrepreneurship. And I think it starts with mentorship. And I think mentorship is probably the #1 secret sauce in entrepreneurship anyways. But it's not just with respect to entrepreneurship. I don't know if you saw the recent study by the Gallup group with respect to productivity in the world for the last 20 years. And the biggest reason why we've seen a drop in talent, a human productivity in companies, is because of the manager. The manager is not acting as a mentor as he or she should be to employees. And this, goes across the line, whether it's, your next manager, your mid manager. So people need the face-to-face interaction, or they need to be mentored. They need to be tutored. That this is what inspires people to work and to have that motivation that is intrinsic, and it helps to develop it. So I think mentorship is the way to create, a push around networking for entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Professor Paris. Professor Schrader, you have quite a bit of experience in research, especially dealing with research-oriented startups. Do you agree with Professor Paris, and would you like to comment on the question at hand?
It's not really my area of expertise, but I would encourage everyone to think about problems that you can solve. Sometimes research is an enabler for that, and if it is, great. If not, then that's fine too.
Thank you, Professor Schrader. Professor Basant, if you have any inputs on the same.
I do not agree with Paris. I mean, both kinds of R&D have a role to play, and if we want to sort of force people to work on research problems which have immediate outcomes, we are constraining their vision. So I think the key is to balance the two, which is not easy to do, but as a society or as an economy, we have to balance the two, because the long term and the short term has to be put together. Otherwise, we'll always be short-term vision. We'll not be looking at long-term kind of issues. So one may get frustrated with scientists who are sort of in some other planet, but they have a role to play, and we should recognize that.
Thank you, Professor Basant. My last question for the day was to Professor Basant, and I open this question to the other panel members as well, which is essentially that students from healthier financial backgrounds are likelier to start their own startup. What are some of the best practices that we could implement as university and academia to ensure that that there is inclusion of students from all financial backgrounds?
So, I mean, there are two ways of looking at it. One is inclusion in admissions. I mean, people like our institutions are, if we are exclusive and not bringing in a diverse set of people, the chances of them becoming entrepreneurs or even getting into other fields become. So the one part is the way you do admissions. IMA is constrained by government policy about admission, but we try and bring in as much diversity as possible given the constraints. This issue of not so well off students not opting for entrepreneurship is likely to happen. You can't avoid that because the opportunity costs are much higher. And if they come in with a loan and they have to repay the loan, it becomes very, very difficult. So at IMA, basically, we are trying to do three things. One is for those who want to become entrepreneurs, we have raised resources to give them a scholarship. Not very large amounts. We don't want to match the salaries they get. They get very good salaries. So survival kind of fellowships, which might help them survive and also pay part of the loan. So we have raised fellowships and we call them Mavericks fellowships. So that's one thing which is open to everybody, which the people with poorer backgrounds can use. The other thing which we have done is to raise resources to give them scholarships to take care of their tuition. You subsidize their tuition so that when they graduate, they don't have such a large loan. So the opportunity costs are lower for them. So we have means-based scholarships. That's the second one. And the third one, which was, Paris talked about uncertainty and dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty is a very difficult task. One of the uncertainties that our students face, we have an excellent record for placement. And one of the reasons why our placement is so good, that our system of placement is very good, and on average, every student gets 2-3 jobs. Now, the worry is that if I don't get placed through the institute system, I go out and become an entrepreneur, and if I fail, what happens? So what we have said is that go out, if it doesn't work out, come back and we'll allow you in the placement system. So we have given them a 2-year time window to come back and be part of the placement system if it has not worked for whatever reason. And we have been using this, others have adopted the same thing. We have been using this for the last, I think, since 2007, 2008. And 2 people have come back for the placement. So nobody comes back. Actually, it's just a kind of a safety net, so to say, but it works.
Thank you, Professor Basant. Taking the question to Professor Shreda and Professor Paris. Professor Shreda, if you have any inputs on the same, what is the best way to ensure inclusion?
I love Professor Basant's idea. I'm going to steal that one. That's a really good one. I think supporting student entrepreneurs at critical inflection points is very important because our students from undergrad to graduates are taking out enormous loans. So it becomes very difficult if you've worked on your project during the year and you have an opportunity to take a summer internship with Amazon. How do you turn that down? One of the ways that, and we've only started this in the past 3 years, is we got an endowment from one of our alums to give small scholarships, $5,000, to teams that have at least one Haas student, so one business school student, and then the rest of the team members can be from other parts of the university. This helps to not only support them, but reward them for trying. And the bonus for us, it's been a real forcing mechanism to get the engineers to walk across the street to talk to the business school students, because they want that $5,000 and they have to have that business school student. So we've designed mechanisms that, engineer and reward inclusion.
Quickly, I just want to add that creating such an endowment about 10 years ago we did it about, once again, alums came forward and created this endowment, was helpful in doing these scholarships. So we also did create this endowment about 12 years ago, actually.
Thank you, Professor Brasan. Thank you, Professor Shreda. Professor Paris, if you have any inputs on the same.
I would just like to say that I congratulate Professor Basan for your initiative there. That's a really good. I would have thought that the coming back would have been a lot more than 2, but that shows that program works. And I also congratulate you, Rhonda, for this 5,000 idea with the Haas students. I think that the trick in all these things is to give incentives, but not throw the whole baby with the water. Okay, because in Europe this thing has not worked because it goes to the other extreme. Essentially, in Europe, and I'll talk about Spain, the government gives so much help for people to do entrepreneurship ideas that you end up with a 90% failure rate. They have this co-investment program where if you find an investor to give you $100,000, the Spanish government will give you another $100,000. Last year, the Spanish government spent $9 million on programs like this. And it's so easy to get that co-investment that a lot of investors invest just because they know that they're doubling their money. And a lot of the entrepreneurs do this to think, well, if it works, it works. I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that entrepreneurs are special people. If they're doing this as a job option, it rarely works. Because if you give 100,000 to somebody who's only doing it for a job option, what are they going to do when they run out of money? They're going to quit. They're going to do something else. If someone is truly committed about their idea, passionate about it, if they're real entrepreneurs and you give them $100,000 and they run out of money, they go looking for more money. It took Steve Jobs 2 years to get money. So I think while these programs are great, and I'm glad to see that you guys have come up with a couple of approaches that work, we need to always be careful that we're, not attracting people who really aren't entrepreneurs. Now, it is true that in many societies, a lot of people that are true entrepreneurs haven't taken the plunge because there's nothing there to help them. And that's why these programs are good, to try to find some of those people. But we have to have a balance. You can't go all far the other way as well.
I just want to mention this, that it's not that everybody is lining up for this. The numbers are small.
Okay.
And we do, so on average every year, out of a class of 400, about 10 to 15 take this fellowship.
Okay.
And we do due diligence. We don't give it to everybody.
Yeah, that's important.
Scholarship is small. It's not that you sort of can live lavishly. It's $100,000, nowhere close to it. I mean, it's survival money.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's a balance. And back to the original point that we talked earlier, Professor Basan. It's not that I'm against research, but I think research has to be relevant. And we have a lot of research, especially in the academic world, that's not. And I think that it's always about finding a balance.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today for the launch of the webinar series by Startup India. I thank Professor Shreda, Professor Paris, Professor Rakesh Basan for their invaluable inputs and insights on how to train the future generation of entrepreneurs and innovators in the skills that are essential to starting their own startup. As revealed during the panel discussion, entrepreneurial education is quintessential to the growth of the Indian economy. Business success requires business preparation, and academic institutions play a crucial role in laying the foundation to a startup's journey. Startup India hopes to act as the stepping stone for academic institutions on their journey to embrace entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. Thank you, all the panel members, for joining us. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.